All right, you cool cats. Yeah, we're back for another review session here. Review number 7. Tonight we're going to do motivation, emotion, and developmental psychology. I promise won't be as long as the last one, and there'll only be one more to follow this one. We'll get a dose of personality and also research methods to say for the end, knowing that we're going to have an FRQ that deals with research methods. So I didn't want to give it to you at first, and then a couple of weeks later have you forget about it before the exam. So let's jump right into it here with emotion. Remember, okay, forest before individual trees. Motivation. What kind of behaviors are we doing to meet our needs and our wants? Okay, that's what we're looking at when we're talking about motivation. We know right off the bat, the first theory listed there, instinct theory, talks about how complex behaviors have fixed patterns and they're not learned. And it does explain a lot of animal motivation, but it does not explain much of human motivation. So this instinct theory, where things occur naturally, not learned. In humans, we have reflexes, rooting and sucking reflex, for example, in young babies, something that's not taught. Salmon swimming upstream is a famous example, to lay eggs. But there's only a few of these behaviors identified for humans, and this theory over time has become obsolete and kind of fallen apart because humans have more complex behaviors than those of animals. Drive reduction theory. Drive reduction theory talks about having a physiological need, okay, that creates an aroused tension. So you'll see here a need, for example, water or food. So what happens then, because the body is outside of equilibrium, is we get a drive. Whether it's thirst, as listed here, whether it's hunger, if we don't have enough food. And what is that drive supposed to do? It pushes us towards a certain behavior, a drive-reducing behavior, such as drinking or eating. And in the end, what that does is that restores a balance within the body. And that balance is known as homeostasis. We need to get our body back to an equilibrium. So drive reduction theory works really, really well with primary drives, things like hunger, things like thirst, things that don't have to be learned. But when we come to more secondary drives, things that are learned, like wealth and success, drive reduction theory doesn't do a good job of explaining those particular desires, needs. So from there, we move on to what we call the arousal theory, right? When we're looking for our optimal level of arousal, that's what motivates human beings. Humans aim to seek that optimal level of arousal. And to go along with it, what we got right here on the screen, this is the Yerkes-Dodson law. It goes hand in hand with the arousal theory. And what it says is, for more simple tasks, it's good to have a high level of arousal that goes along with them. I know we give the example in class, if you're running out of that tunnel on a Friday night to go out, for the big football game, the actual running out onto the field, you can get as hyped as you want. There's not a high level of mental focus that goes into that. Whereas if we're preparing and sitting down and ready to take the SAT or a more difficult test, we're not looking to have those incredibly high levels of arousal. We want to be more focused within that moment. And that's what the Yerkes-Dodson law talks about. And you can see it right here on the chart, right? As we look at a more difficult task, we got to have a level of arousal that's not as high, somewhere in the middle, because as we get a higher level of arousal, performance tends to drop off. Whereas when we take a simple task, higher level of arousal, obviously we reach a plateau, but it works out better. Next up, our favorite. I'll tell you what, gals and guys, if this comes up today, the AP, okay, hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow, and theory derived where humans are looking to be the best version of themselves and reach self-actualization. If that comes up the day of the test, whatever guy you believe in really, really likes you. Just going to give you that right off the bat, okay? And we know what this says, that we have to meet our most basic needs first, our physiological needs, our safety needs, They have to be met in order to work our way up that pyramid and eventually get to self-actualization, where we're becoming the best version of ourselves, all that we can be. The only thing this chart doesn't take into account, what you're seeing on the screen now, is transcendence. That's when you reach the point in which, guess what? Now you're helping others reach self-actualization. Transcendence, there's talk in the APA about renaming that the Brennan principle, because that's what I do. I help others reach transcendence. Two other things here, just so we have, I'll move myself across the screen. Intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So we are aware intrinsic motivation is an inner motivation. You do it because you enjoy doing it. You don't need some sort of reward that comes out of it. Remember what we talked about with intrinsic motivation. If someone's intrinsically motivated to do something, you're not looking to give them some sort of reward or reinforcement for doing it, because a lot of times what you're going to do is kill that intrinsic motivation that goes along with it. Our extrinsic motivation is the motivation to obtain some sort of reward or to avoid some sort of punishment. Sometimes we only focus on the reward portion of things, but avoiding punishment is another one that we can kind of focus on when it comes to extrinsic motivation. Okay, when we go to hunger, okay, the motivation of hunger, this chart does an excellent job at laying out the biological, the psychological, as well as the social, cultural influences on hunger. The stomach is going to tell us when we're hungry. That's one of the major biological things. If you remember, those are called stomach pangs. Okay, and after that, what we have is I have a list of various hormones in the body that are going to be related to hunger. So I'll quickly go through those, and then from there we'll go to the parts of the brain which are gonna control this. So we call these our appetite hormones. Glucose, it's gonna maintain the sugar level in the body, produced by the pancreas and the endocrine system. And then you have insulin. This is going to it decreases glucose. Too little glucose is going to make us hungry. Orexin, that's going to be released by the hypothalamus. We'll get there in a minute when we talk about the individual parts of the hypothalamus. And it's going to tell us to eat. So when we get here and we talk about the hypothalamus being broken into two parts. Remember, when we talked about biological basis of behavior, and we're talking about the hypothalamus, we're thinking hypothermia. It regulates the body. We're talking, when we talk about body regulation here, we're talking about body temperature, for example, but it can be hunger, etc. And the first part there is our lateral hypothalamus. When it's stimulated, it's going to make you hungry. If you lesion it or take it out, you're never going to eat again because you don't have that desire. It doesn't lead to desire to be hungry. Your ventral medial hypothalamus, when stimulated, you feel full. If you lesion the ventral medial hypothalamus, okay, you're always going to be hungry. And when we looked at, if you remember those PowerPoints and you remember looking at the fat rats that were in there who had their ventral medial hypothalamus that was lesioned, they work in conjunction with each other. It's another example of homeostasis in the body. Lateral hypothalamus making you hungry, okay? Ventral medial hypothalamus suppressing that hunger, and they work with each other to balance out. You'll see leptin there. Leptin signals the brain to reduce appetite. Again, leptin is going to signal the brain to reduce appetite. Next up on our list is going to be obesity. We're really concerned in terms of AP psychology with what are the risks of dealing with obesity, okay? And right off the bat, heart attack becomes one of the big risks. Hypertension, right? High blood pressure. Diabetes is a big one that can go along with this. On the screen, you can see a bunch of other ones, but keep it pretty simple when it comes to this. In terms of obesity, when we talk about nature and nurture with it, it can absolutely be genetic, okay? But at the same time, you wonder, because adopted children tend to also resemble their parents in a lot of ways. So we do know that while genetic, there's also definitely a nurture piece to this, an environment piece that goes along with this. We talk about our set point here. Our set point is very important. It's like the thermostat for your body, and it is unique to each individual. Okay, it's a control system. It's going to dictate how much fat you should carry. Again, every person is different. And that's why when people start to try to fight their set point, they don't always find a success in dieting, or when they immediately stop dieting, the body starts to work back towards that set point. Really important. In terms of eating disorders, okay, there's two that we've covered. Anorexia is basically, you have a distorted body image that can follow with body dysmorphic disorder, and you have a weight loss of at least 15% of your ideal weight. You can achieve this through stopping eating. You can achieve this through over exercising. And in terms of psychology, we are definitely interested in why this takes place. We find that anorexia tends to happen in households where parents are overly critical, where a perfectionist tendency is there, always striving for that perfection, where societal ideals are considered very important, where all of a sudden, Instagram models and whoever is on Facebook, etc., becomes what is the norm. And we know that's not the case from talking in class. Going along with this, other eating disorder, bulimia that you'll see there. You normally have that usual body weight. However, you go through a binge and purge type of situation where you overeat, and then through purging, through forcing yourself to vomit, through the use of laxatives, etc., you purge all that extra food from the body. And causes of this seem to go right along with anorexia. And like I said in the beginning when I was talking about anorexia, for a lot of people, okay, this is going to be a body dysmorphic disorder. We're talking about, even though their body might be ideal, okay, they still want to lose weight because it's not how they see themselves. Or when they're anorexic and they're more than 15% under the ideal weight, and most people can see, hey, this person does not look healthy. They think they appear healthy, so body dysmorphic disorder goes along with those. The next thing you'll see on your list there is sexuality. You'll notice that it's all filled in. That's because Mr. Brennan is not covering that with you, even through a recorded Zoom. Not my cup of tea to talk about. It's a very limited chance that it show up on the AP, and if it does, oh boy, there it is. Moving on. Hey, when we talk about theories of emotion, okay, when we talk about emotions, we know emotions tend to have three parts to them. They have a stimulus that's going to take place out there. That raw data is going to be driven and given to the brain. And we have some type of autonomic response followed by some conscious feeling that's going to take place. And it's basically, when we look at the three major ones when we deal with this, James Lang, Cannon-Bard, Solomon Schachter two-factor theory. Anytime we talk about any of these, it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg. In the James Lang theory, remember, I've always told you to underline the J and the L and just listen to your heart, right? So when we talk about the James Lang theory, a stimulus tends to take place first, followed by a physiological arousal, followed by the emotion. So big scary dog, like we have in this picture, comes running out at you. Heart starts to beat really fast. As a result of the heart beating really fast, you get that conscious feeling of, oh my God, fear. It's pretty close to the picture, right? As we shift to the Cannon-Bard theory, remember, underline the C and the B can be both, okay? This happens, you get that stimulus. So big scary dog comes out, okay? And then all of a sudden, the physiological arousal and the emotion take place at the same time. So the stimulus, dog, okay, very scary dog, heart starts beating extremely fast at the same time, right? that I'm, oh my God, I'm afraid. I should be afraid. I have fear taking place. The Schachter two-factor theory, it adds a cognitive label element to it. And we know that's why this is Mr. Brennan's favorite part of emotion. So what happens here? What's the order here? We get a stimulus, okay? We get an arousal that's going to take place. So your dog, okay, heartbeat starts beating really fast. I then have to assess that autonomic response, right? Your heart beating really fast can be multiple various things in the body. It can be an indication of several emotions that, that you could possibly have in this time. So then you cognitively appraise that and you say, okay, self, and of course this happens extremely fast. Why is heart beating fast? Okay, I'm scared. Here comes the fear that goes along with it. So, and just so you know, sometimes stimuli are routed directly to the amygdala. So they're going to be sent to that fear part of the brain or the emotional part of the brain, and they bypass that frontal cortex. Sometimes that takes place, like, your gut reaction when you see a cockroach crawling across, if anybody's ever seen that, I don't know. That's just an example that came to mind when I was thinking right there. But for the most part, these are the three accepted theories. Just so we know, in terms of behavioral factors, we know that there are considered 6 universal emotions, okay? Happiness, anger, sadness, surprise, disgust, fear. And they're seen across all cultures. So these 6 emotions are considered to be universal. How do we know that? Well, because if you take blind babies, if you remember we looked at this study, and they haven't seen other people's facial responses and say, oh, this is the appropriate facial response that I should have for anger, for fear, etc. They tend eventually to develop those same responses there. So we think that's more of an innate thing in humans that spans, across various cultures. In terms of the facial feedback theory of emotion, I'll read it right here with the slide. In the facial feedback theory of emotion, a stimulus such as this snarling dog causes arousal and a facial expression. The facial expression then provides feedback to the brain about the emotion. The brain then interprets the emotion and may also intensify it. Okay, so when we talk about those universal emotions, and when we talk about our reactions that take place, that they tend to be universal, this theory is saying our brain is going to take cue from our face at times when it comes to this. And we know that sometimes in this facial feedback hypothesis, we can sometimes start to feel happier simply by smiling. You're kind of giving the mind the indicator of how you should be feeling, the emotion you should be feeling in that particular moment. Moving on real quick here. I know this got cut short during the course of the year, but I do want to cover a couple of things with stress that generally tags right along with this unit. If you can remember when we did this, we did general adaptation syndrome, aka GAS, right? Identified by our man Hans Seeley. And, we always talked about, when you're stressed, can't wait to get your Hans on you. Get it? Great mnemonic device. And it broke down into 3 individual phases here. So it's the 3 phases of stress reaction, essentially. First phase being the alarm phase. This is when you freak out in response to stress. Okay, your autonomic nervous system is going to start kicking into gear right away. Okay, the heart rate's going to increase. The blood pressure is going to increase. Breathing rate is going to increase. Those pupils are going to dilate. Okay, and then you go into what we call the resistance phase, where you start to cope with that particular stress. And the body can handle that for only so long. Okay, again, that resistance phase cannot last forever. Eventually, your body is going to protect itself and start to go on the downslope. This is the exhaustion phase, that last phase. Your body cannot take any more. Your reserves have been depleted, okay? Coffee can't help you anymore. Energy drinks can't help you anymore. Okay, and your body says, hey, I need rest, I need sleep, I need to, regain homeostasis here before we start to get back on that horse again. All right, and again, the longer we try to push through that resistance phase, we open up the body to numerous health side effects that go along with it. All right, so those are the 3 stages of our general adaptation syndrome. Next part here that I just wanted to touch upon, not in there, not written down, but I was going through an AP, and some years we get to this, some years we don't, but I saw it in terms of an FRQ, and I was like, you know what, I just want to go over it quick. These are 3 types of conflict, okay? And each of them can cause a level of stress in the body. And you might say to yourself, well, stress, it only happens when there's, negative choices. Not the case. You can see the approach conflict that's there. That's when you take 2 really good things and there's a stress in making a decision. So it could be like on Friday night, do I Zoom with Mr. Brennan, or on Friday night, do I go out with my friends? I mean, these are 2 really great options and they might cause you a level of stress. There's avoidance. You have 2 very undesirable things going on, but you got to choose one of them, okay? And that can cause a level of stress. And then there's, of course, approach avoidance, having to choose between 2 or more, things which is desirable and one is undesirable. And that could more realistically be the example that I gave. Should I be watching my Zoom recording Friday night, Mr. Brennan, knowing I have an AP on Monday? Okay, probably don't want to do it. Okay, or should I be hanging out with my homies? Right? Probably more desirable. But then when it comes to the result elements of things, like the result of the AP exam, for example, all of a sudden, there's a stress associated with that. Type A and B personalities. Listen, okay, we've gone over this. We took the type A personality test, and the differences are pretty clear. Someone with a type A personality, they're rigid, they're perfectionists. They tend to be a stressful person. And one of the biggest things with type A personality is we know that this individual, okay, is going to be prone to heart disease because of the prolonged stress that the personality type puts on the body. A type B individual, they're laid back, they're not stressed, okay? And we did this in class. And of course, you can be a combination of the 2, a type AB, the type C personality, okay? But any of those things also go along with the stress unit here. Also, to add on to this particular unit, I know this is like a little poo-poo platter, a conglomerate rock of sorts. Industrial organizational psych. This is what I told you in the beginning of the year. I said, hey, you want to get into something where you're going to, kind of entwine together business with psychology. This is it. This is big ticket. So this is the psychology of the workforce. It focuses on employee recruitment. It focuses on placement, training, productivity, worker satisfaction, all these various things with the goal of making a happy and productive workforce. Pretty important stuff. So you see on your sheet there, you'll have ergonomics or human factors. This is the kind of like the intersection of engineering and psych. It focuses on safety and efficiency of the human-machine interaction. I've seen that one time on the AP exam, but I thought I would throw it out there for you. The Hawthorne effect we have talked about. Productivity increases when workers feel important, when workers notice they're being watched, right? A company brought in organizational industrial psychologists to look at their workers, and all they did was study it. And all of a sudden their productivity went up, and the manager said, what'd you do? Okay, how did this happen? We didn't do anything. We were just watching these individuals. You watch these individuals, they tend to work more productively. They tend to feel more important in that moment. So really cool effect there. 2 types of management theories that we're going to throw out there. One, theory X management. The manager controls the employees, they enforce the rules, and we know this is good for lower level jobs, that kind of top-down structure, not a lot of autonomy that's within it. And then we go to theory Y management, okay, where the manager gives the employees a say, it gives them an input, he looks to them, doesn't overmanage them, not always looking over their shoulder, feels like you should give them the opportunity to get the job done. And this is much better for high-level jobs. And we've talked about this, the Google model of things. And we looked at Daniel Pink's Driven, what drives individuals in the workplace. And, once that money factor goes away and it's autonomy, right? The right to explore what we want to explore and not feel like we're being micromanaged. So that's where it comes in. Oh, here we go. We're going on to developmental psych here, womb to tomb. So one of the big things here, and I can't see this really coming up in an FRQ. I haven't yet. Sorry, allergies again are horrible. Okay, but in terms of fetal development, you'll see here, right, 3 to 8 weeks. We are looking at an embryo, 9+ weeks to birth. Remember, birth process generally 38 to 40 weeks. We're looking at a fetus here. Now, one of the big things, and I can see this coming up in an FRQ, is teratogens, right? These are external agents that can cause abnormal prenatal development, okay? External agents that can cause abnormal fetal development. So they are going to be ingested by the mother. As a result, they affect fetal development. These are things like alcohol, drugs, diseases like HIV, for example, that can negatively impact the fetus, and upon birth, we'll see effects. One of the major ones, of course, fetal alcohol syndrome, or FAS, and it causes deformities within the child, mental retardation, in severe cases, death. So really important to understand teratogens. I can definitely see that coming up as a possible term in an FRQ. In terms of physical development, really important to understand the term maturation there. It's the natural course of development. You can see the aging process taking place there. It occurs no matter what. And we know that a lot of times, a lot of our milestones in life are based off of maturation, meaning no matter the environment we put someone in, no matter the training that we give someone, okay, it happens when it happens, when the body matures to a certain state. One of the things that we are born with, though, are reflexes. These are innate reflexes that we are born with, things like our rooting reflex, our sucking reflex, our swallowing reflex, our grasping reflex, our stepping reflex. And we don't have to learn those. In the same way, remember, we did this back with the unit on learning. Maturation, this is not a learning process. This is not something you learn. It's something that occurs naturally. And you'll see that the term there, habituation. This is the idea is after, you continually pay attention to something, or you have continual exposure to something for a long period of time, you tend to pay less attention to it. We used to use this kind of to test babies to see where they were at in their development, what they had been exposed to. You can get them to pay attention to certain things. After habituation, they no longer do, so we know what they've been exposed to. In terms of development, the eyes have the most limited development at first, okay? And you can go back to sensation and perception and Mike May and know that's because, and that's why at first babies can't see more than 6 inches in front of them, and that sight is going to continue to progress until the baby's 1 year old. Remember, babies, their most sensitive sense at first is touch. That's going to work at humans as adults. Our most dominant sense is eyesight, but it takes a long time to come about because the body, it's so much not just about the raw data, but also the perception piece of things. And we need to build up our experiences in order for that to take place. See the term visual cliff there. That's how we know that depth perception is kind of innate. And you remember this scenario that we talked about in class. I know you covered it on your own as well. Babies, they understand depth perception. And this is the photograph here, right? That's a glass covering, but the baby stops. They don't come to the mother right away. And it's because they perceive a drop off there, which leads us to believe they see things in 3D and have a sense of depth perception. Other senses are fairly well developed. One of the biggest things here, though, when it comes to this, is the brain continues to develop for years and years and years. A lot of people think early 20s is when the brain that frontal lobe is fully developed. Right away, hey, Jean Piaget, right, and cognitive development here. Broke cognitive development, I'm going to try to keep myself on the screen here, into 4 different stages, right? Our sensory motor stage, our pre-operational stage, our concrete operational stage, and our formal operational stage. You say to yourself, how the heck did he get to this point? What was it based off of? It was based off of schemas, and we talked about this with cognition, right? Concepts or frameworks that organize information. And over the course of time, these schemas become more complex. And we can do one of 2 things with these schemas. We can assimilate them, so we can take new information and incorporate it into an already existing schema. That can happen, or we can accommodate. So accommodation is we can adjust existing schemas, make them more complex to kind of include our new information that we encounter. Remember, I always talk about the example of my son, and we go to the zoo and there's the tiger and he goes, kitty cat. No, okay, deadly cat. He had that one schema in place for all cats. No, that's not going to work. He had to accommodate. He's going to split that into a more detailed, more complex schema that's there. Okay, so in the sensory motor stage, you're focused, the child is focused on exploring the world around them. 3 major concepts that come out of this in this phase. They lack object permanence, right? Out of sight, out of mind. They don't understand if you take an object, you put it behind you, okay, that object, they don't think that object's there anymore. So when the object's removed from the field of view, they think that object's gone. That's what makes peekaboo so damn fun, right? For a young kid, Mr. Brennan's no longer here. He can't be here, even though he can hear me. And boom! Okay, back into the screen. That's what we talk about with object permanence. They don't have a sense of self, right? A young child doesn't even recognize themselves in the mirror when it comes to this. And we also can talk about the idea of attachment during this phase, but we're going to hold off until we get to Mary Ainsworth to talk about that. The pre-operational stage of things here. That's when children begin to use pretend play for the first time. That's when they start to develop language. That's when they start to use intuitive reasoning. But there are limitations here, things they lack that Piaget talked about them. One of them is they lack conservation. They fail to recognize that substances remain the same despite changes in shape, despite changes in length or position. And you think of that video with that poor girl and the glass of milk that we watched, right? She literally watched the wider glass, okay, get poured into the taller glass that was thinner, and said, does this one have more or did this one have more? It's like this one because it's taller. No, sweetheart, that is the same amount. That is a law of conservation that generally starts to get mastered by this point in time, towards the end of the stage, sorry. They lack reversibility, so they can't do reverse operations. So 4 + 2 looks different than 2 + 4, for example, although we know you can flip those around. And they're egocentric, okay? What does that mean? They can't understand the idea of their perspective is not someone else's perspective. They think they see what they see everybody else is seeing. It's that physical vantage point, okay? So right now I'm looking at the window in my dining room. If I was in this pre-observational stage and I had egocentrism, guess what? I would think you guys are looking at the exact same thing, even though you're not in this room with me, and it's not possible. If you could see the same thing as me right now, that's creepy, scary, and I'm concerned. Okay. Also in the area, though I didn't list it, theory of mind. That's the idea that you think everybody has these same thoughts, opinions, processes that you have, and no one has a differing opinion. Remember, we talked about in class, the first time you realize that's not true, it can be pretty traumatic. Then we get to the concrete operational stage. One of the biggest things here is they can use operational thinking. They can classify. They can think logically in a concrete context. The key here is they still lack that abstract thought, those similes, those deep metaphors, the hidden meanings, sarcasm still doesn't work well with this group. And then eventually, of course, we move on to formal operational stage of things. And now the big key here is we can use abstract and idealistic thought, okay? We can use hypothetical reasoning. We can use deductive reasoning, right? We can go divergent thinking. We can go in a bunch of different places with this when we reach the formal operational stage, just a more complex thought process. When we talk about problems with Piaget, we know that one of the things we saw these stages as very rigid. When we know they're more fluid, we know the idea that Piaget didn't give young kids the credit they probably deserved with cognitive development, probably not enough with environment also here. One of the big things before I roll, Vygotsky, I know we talked about him very briefly in class as somebody who was kind of like another cognitive development type person, but he put a larger emphasis than Piaget on the social process too, that we learned and cognitively developed through interacting with others. Listen, we saw this with our own son when we put him in daycare, and he was constantly around other kids interacting all day long. And one of his big things was his zones of proximal development that he came up with. There are certain things that kids can do on their own, but there's a gap and they're going to need support. And the best way to be supported is going to be through scaffolding information, but by doing it with others, someone who might be more knowledgeable, but also with their peers. These are these zones of proximal development. Okay. In terms of social emotional development, real quick here, yes, this is Harry Harlow's monkey. We'll get there in a second. Okay, temperament we see on our list. Temperament is patterns of emotional reactions. They're kind of like a temperament is a precursor to a personality. So babies, they describe in terms of their temperament, how they handle things, not as much personality. Personality takes a little longer to develop. Imprinting's another term. Baby geese believe the first thing they see after hatching is their mom. This happens during a critical period. Okay, so that is imprinting. Humans do not have that. And when we talk about Harry Harlow and his monkey here. He discovered that contact comfort is more important than feeding. So he had monkeys feed on wire and cloth mothers. And what he realized is that the monkeys wanted the comfort, okay? They wanted the cloth mothers. And they also realized that monkeys raised in isolation, monkeys that didn't get this comforting feeling, they couldn't socialize as they got older. Next favorite here, Mary Ainsworth. You'll remember the situation that she came up with, right? That we watched in the video. Child is in the room with the caregiver and somebody else. Then the caregiver, the mother, father, leaves the room, and we watch the child, of course, is going to grow upset. And when the parent comes back in the room, we watch what's called the reunion with the child. This was called the strange situation paradigm. And that reuniting stage, we can find out a lot about the attachment between the mother in a lot of cases, or the father, and mother in particular though here, and the child. And she came up with 4 different types of attachment. And you'll see the first there, a secure attachment. This is where 60% of infants live, right around there. And they're upset when the mom leaves, but they're easily calm when the mother comes back. That's normal. And it's normal up until after 2 years of age, actually. And they tend to be more stable as adults. Avoidant attachment. This tends to happen in about 20% of infants. Sorry, I need another drink of water here. Where avoidant attachment, sorry, that's where we are. Where they actively avoid mom, and when mom returns, they don't really seem comforted by it. They don't really seem concerned by it. They don't really pay attention to it. We have the ambivalent attachment. That's kind of 10% of the time that takes place, and that's they actively avoid mom, but they also freak out when mom leaves. Okay, and then the disorganized attachment, where they're confused, they're fearful, they're dazed, and a lot of times, why that's important is this disorganized attachment is generally a sign that abuse is taking place. So these attachment styles are still really studied today because they give us some pertinent information about the child. In terms of parenting styles, woo-hoo-hoo, authoritarian parents, right? They're those rules and authoritarian parents. They're those rules people, those obedience people, that my way or the highway type of people. Listen, their kids are going to be people who tend to lack initiative in college. That's one of the biggest things. They start to go off on their own, explore the world, get a little taste of freedom. The permissive parents, this is where kids do whatever. There's no rules. This is my kid is my best friend mentality. And they also tend to lack initiative in college. And then you get to the authoritative parent, okay? They're warm, okay? But they also exert a level of control. So it's a give and take with the kids. I'd like to hopefully think that my classroom is an example of like an authoritative type of situation. And this is where kids can become socially competent and can become really reliable down the line. Oh yeah, Kohlberg's moral development. Okay, we know when it comes to moral development, it is broken into 3 levels, 2 stages in each level for a total of 6 stages. So level 1 you'll see on your list here is pre-conventional morality. Listen, why kids do things, remember, it was all about for Kohlberg why you're doing it. Not what you're doing, but why you're doing it. He gave the Heinz dilemma, right, of stealing the drug that the pharmacist wouldn't give you, and your spouse is dying, and do you steal it? And remember, he wasn't concerned about if you stole it or not, just why you went about doing that. So that pre-conventional level is about reward and punishment. Stage 1 is going to be you want to avoid punishment. Stage 2, you're looking for a reward. Level 2 of conventional morality. This is generally where adolescents live. You follow the rules because you're following kind of a role. In stage 3, you want to meet the expectation of others, okay? So this is that good boy, good girl orientation type thing. I want my peers to think highly of me. So why didn't I start a food fight in the cafeteria? I didn't do it because I didn't want my friends to think I was this rebel or this bad individual. Stage 4 is about society. The society has rules, and these are what the rules are. So listen, these are society's expectations. So this is what I'm going to do. Okay, speed limit's 35. That's what society tells me is appropriate and I have to do. So guess what? I'm going 35. I don't break the law. Oh, got to go back for a minute. Sorry. Then we get to post-conventional morality, that last level. Adults can have this, but guess what? It doesn't mean, and Kohlberg was very clear about this, just because you have the capability of being at that higher level doesn't mean you're necessarily there. I mean, look at Mr. Mann now. He's 35 years old. He doesn't live on this level of morality. So in stage 5, okay, this post-conventional morality, you do what you believe is right. That you kind of insert personal values into it, but you talk about the law being mendable, the law being malleable. So yeah, 35 is the speed limit, but if someone's really sick and they might die if I don't speed and get to the hospital, Then going to speed to get to the hospital. And that last level, level 6, that's when you create your own principles. These larger than life type things you follow, that Gandhi-esque type stuff, those transcendent things, those laws that transcend all of society, those universal type of principles. And we know that Kohlberg did, Carol Gilligan, you guys wrote fantastic responses to this, came along and said that, you didn't look at women when you did this, and that women have a different moral center and moral compass than that of men. Theirs tends to deal with the care for others. Okay, that's where we get Gilligan from. Really important stuff. Okay, when we get to Erikson's psychosocial stages, there are 8 stages. Each one represents some sort of conflict, some sort of crisis. And, you have to successfully navigate this stage, or else, Erikson said, this would show up later in life. Okay? This needed to be resolved, or it could become a weakness later on within your life. Now, the chart is there. I gave you the answers on your own sheet. We don't have to go through each of these. Obviously, the first, trust versus mistrust, is very important. The child's needs are supposed to be met. And if the child has their basic needs met and they emerge from this after about 1.5 years with a sense of trust, that should carry with them through life. One of the big ones there you see is adolescence, okay? Finding an identity becomes very important during this stage as we tend to move on in our lives. But each of these you can easily look at on your own. Just understand the idea that each stage has some sort of crisis. You have to successfully go through this stage at some point. Otherwise, it's going to end up with like a weakness in your personality later on. Remember, we talk about Erikson. Erikson was a neo-Freudian, and he had a big influence on personality. So yes, of course, we use this for human development, but it's also seen in the personality chapter as well, where if certain crises or certain conflicts aren't successfully resolved, it shows in our personality later on and down the road. All right, moving on here. The 5 stages of grief, right? Kubler-Ross. And again, you guys did wonderful responses to these. First stage is generally denial. This can't be happening. So you get a diagnosis from a doctor, perhaps, about an ailment. Maybe it's cancer. It's wrong. It's wrong. I don't have that. Okay, that's denial stage. Then you flow into what's called the anger stage, the why me stage. I've lived such a good life. Why me? Why not somebody else who hasn't lived the same quality, moral life all along? Then comes the bargaining stage of things. Just let me live, okay? And I'll make sure I live life to my fullest. I'll never do this particular thing again. Then we get to the point of the depression stage of things here. Why bother? Why continue with this? And eventually acceptance, where we get a level of the individual understanding that, the time has come. And we see here, this is 5 stages of grief in a divorce. It can be, applied to a whole bunch of areas. Kubler-Ross has been criticized because saw this as more of a linear process, which we know through research probably isn't the case all the time. Last part of this, we talked about womb to tomb. Woohoo! So 2 different types of studies. This can be really important, guys, when it comes to research methods. The gold standard, so I'll skip to it first, is a longitudinal study. Think long is in there, or lines of longitude go, this way. This is going to be, you study the same people over time. Gold standard. Okay, it eliminates group differences. It allows you to gain a lot of detail in your responses. The problem with it is they're extremely expensive. They're extremely time consuming. You get high dropout rates. Think about someone staying in a study from the time they're a young child all the way up until the time they're ready to pass away. But we have had studies that have lasted over 100 years. And they provide great data. Then there is a cross-sectional study. It studies people of different ages, okay? at the same time. So we'll take a couple of people from this age group, a couple of people from this age group, a couple of people from this age group, just do a study, see what's similar, see what's different, etc. Okay, the advantages, they're inexpensive, they're quick. Okay, the disadvantages of this is they can be different due to a generational gap that's there, right? You're using different people, so it might not be nearly as good. Guys, I got some great news. That is the end of the review session here, with just one more to go. So no FRQ at the end of this particular one. That's more good news, I guess you could say. If you want to look at an FRQ, look at the one we did for motivation and emotion. That's right in that unit. The key is up, so you can look at all the possible terms if you want to. If you don't, that's fine too. You guys have a great night, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon, you cool cats.